A well-written recipe is designed to guide you through the process of creating it while minimizing stress and resulting in successful recipe creation. If you're anything like me, you've tried recipes where the end result looks nothing like the photo, or you find that you're missing an essential ingredient halfway through, or the kitchen looks like a disorganized mess after recipe completion. However, with practice and some know-how, you can easily learn how to read a recipe and understand recipe language, making the process of cooking easier and growing your kitchen confidence exponentially. I'm Nichole Dandrea-Russert, Food Revolution Network's dietitian and recipe developer, and today I'm going to share some helpful tips on how to read and follow a recipe so that stress is minimized and recipe creation is successful. While you might be eager to dive straight into the recipe, especially if it seems really simple, it's important to read through the entire recipe first. In fact, read through it once to understand what the process looks like, and then use the second round of reading to understand what you'll need to have on hand, from kitchen equipment to ingredients to the required space. It may even be helpful to write down the equipment and tools you'll need, just like you would write down the ingredients you need to grab from the grocery store. Check the prep time and the cook time listed at the top of a recipe to understand how much total time it will take to create the recipe. If it seems like a lengthy recipe, then look at the directions, or if there are prep ahead instructions to see if certain components of the recipe can be prepared ahead of time and stored away for later. Also, in the directions, look for phrases like "in the meantime" or "at the same time," which indicate that two or more steps can happen simultaneously. Also look for phrases like "let simmer," "refrigerate until chilled," or "marinate for 30 minutes," which indicate moments where you may be able to do other steps in that recipe. Finally, there may be steps in the directions that require you to do a little planning ahead. For example, since cashews are a versatile nut that can easily turn into a creamy product, they're often used to make cashew cheese. Oftentimes, recipes will ask you to soak cashews in water for an hour or two before proceeding with the recipe. Reading the directions ahead of time will help you be prepared to add the already soaked cashews to the recipe. The last thing you want to do is carefully schedule time to make a recipe only to find out that you missed a preliminary step that is essential before making that recipe. Well-written recipes will include ingredients in order in which they are used. For example, if a stir fry requires sauteing onions and peppers before adding broccoli, then onions and peppers should be listed first in the ingredient list. Sometimes you'll see the word divided. For example, bok choy stems are a little hardier than the bok choy leaves. You may see one bunch of bok choy in the ingredient list, then under the description see stems and leaves divided and chopped. This means you'll want to separate the stems and leaves, as they are most likely going to be added during different steps in that recipe. You may also see something like 3 cups of vegetable broth divided in half, meaning that you may be adding half of the broth earlier in the recipe before adding the remaining half later. Pay attention to how ingredients are prepared. For example, 1 cup of chopped walnuts is not the same as 1 cup of walnuts chopped. In the first example, the walnuts are chopped, then measured in a cup. In the second, whole walnuts are measured and then chopped. Once you understand all the ingredients you'll need, it's time to assess your cabinets, fridge, and freezer and grab any recipe ingredients from the grocery store that may be missing. Cooking tends to be a little more flexible than baking. If you're familiar with certain ingredients and amounts to be used based on your flavor preferences, then you may be able to get away with recipes simply being a guide rather than following the measurements exactly. However, if the recipe is new to you, or if you're new to cooking, then following a recipe exactly may be helpful and more likely to result in a successful outcome. Baking, on the other hand, rarely has wiggle room in the measurements. Make sure to use measuring spoons and not a soup spoon or a teaspoon that's used for consuming meals. There's also a difference between liquid measuring cups and dry measuring cups. Have both on hand so that your measurements are standardized. If a recipe calls for the weight of an ingredient or multiple ingredients, then grab your scale to properly weigh. While taking these careful steps might seem like more work, they'll help to ensure the success of a dish. While measuring all of the ingredients out before starting a recipe might seem a lot of extra work, Trust me, it'll actually make recipe creation much more enjoyable, efficient, and ensure that there are no mishaps in the kitchen while you are scrambling to find ingredients. Once you have the ingredients on hand and are ready to make the recipe, measure out everything ahead of time before starting with recipe creation. I like to use a variety of fun bowls, placing the ingredients in the size that suits them. If a recipe gives you a range of time to cook, for example, 15 to 20 minutes, make sure to check for doneness at the 15 mark. Oven temperatures can vary and the cooking time may vary depending on the source of your ingredients, and you'll want to avoid overcooking. The great thing about plant-based cooking is that you can safely test the doneness of a dish by taste testing. If this is a recipe you think you'll make again, then be sure to take notes on what worked and what you may change for next time, whether it's your recipe creation process, the equipment you used, or ingredients you added. Maybe you made a casserole that seemed a bit dry or overcooked on top. Make a note to decrease the baking time by 5 or 10 minutes next time. The more you make and refine a recipe, the better it'll taste to you and the easier it will be to make again and again. I hope you enjoyed today's how to cook video and learn some useful tips. If you know someone who is interested in getting in the kitchen but feeling a bit overwhelmed or they're unsure where to start, make sure to share this video with them. I'm Nichole Dandrea-Russert, and I look forward to seeing you for the next How to Cook segment.